Now let me welcome onto the show Tennessee head coach Rick Barnes. We're going to break down the Volunteers right now. Coach, I appreciate you being here. What's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing good, and like everybody, getting excited about the start of the season here, and I think we're all looking forward to seeing some outside competition.
Yeah, I think everybody is at this point. They're probably sick of the scrimmages and the practices and the conditioning drills. I knew that was the worst part of preseason for me. So let's start you off with this. You're turning over a lot of players on this roster, but you do have some important pieces coming back in John Fulkerson and Josiah Jordan-James and Santiago Vescovi. It feels like having veteran presence in college basketball is probably the most important thing at this point. So what have those guys provided? What has the leadership been like from those guys heading into this season?
Well, they're obviously important because of the experience that they bring back, and it's not obviously on the court, but it's what they're going to do off the court. And I think where we've lacked, and we talked about it at the end of last year, we wanted to see more leadership out of our older players, and we really challenged those guys to do that, all three of them. And I will tell you, I do think they've done a terrific job up to this point, understanding that they've been through it. We've got 6, 7 new freshmen in the program that don't have a clue what they're getting into right now. And but all three of those guys have done the leadership part for us, not only off the court, but it's carried over to the court. And for us to really get where we want to go, that's probably as important as anything that we're faced with.
So let me ask you about Fulkerson. He was a guy at the end of the 2020 season. It felt like he was, as good as any big man in the SEC down the stretch of that season. Last year, he didn't quite live up to the expectation that a lot of people had. He's back again this season. What are you expecting out of him, and what kind of year do you think he's primed to have?
Well, John, a year ago, had done everything you could ask a player to do to get ready for the season. And, he got hit with the COVID, prior to the season. And if there is any such thing as COVID fatigue, it hit him. And he actually had started getting it back together towards the end of the year. And then we had the incident in the Florida game where he took the shot, and from that point on, he was again out. But he's done everything again to get himself ready to have a great year this year.
So I feel like last season, you had a roster full of guys that were primed to do a job, that were great in a role, that were great finishers, but you didn't have someone that could kind of set the table for them. This year, you got Kennedy Chandler, and I don't know if there's a point guard in college basketball that is better suited at setting the table for people than Kennedy. So what has that transition been like, getting him ready for his first season? And when you have a freshman point guard and you kind of turn the reins over to him, how difficult is that, giving that adjustment to that level?
Well, first of all, you're right about Kennedy. He's a player that, first of all, his teammates have great respect for him because, he's not a person that's, expects anything other than to work hard and be part of the group. And, he's got talent, certainly. And I think with the addition of, Zachariah Zigler, it's helped Kennedy, it's helped Santiago. So we really do feel that we're going into this year was truly the most depth we ever had at that position. But you mentioned Kennedy he is a guy that does create some havoc for defenses because his speed, his quickness, he's learning how to adjust to a different game, which is what every freshman goes through. But I think his personality is something that his teammates have fallen in love with too, because there's not one selfish thing about the way he plays the game, and he's working hard to try to improve, and that's what it's about with him. He just wants to get better each and every day. And I think when his players, his teammates look at how hard he's trying to work and how he's willing to be coached, I think it just rolls down to everyone else.
So Josiah Jordan-James, he's a guy that came in with a certain level of kind of hype, 5-star prospect, big time player. This feels like kind of a critical year for him, right? And it feels like this is the kind of team that he should be able to thrive on. He's perfect kind of in that role, kind of as like a combo forward. He's going to be a defensive menace. What have you seen out of him? What's the development been looked like, and what kind of what level do you think he can get to as a junior?
Well, what we have seen is what we knew from the first time we met him. He's all about understanding the importance of getting better and to continue to develop his game and get it where he wants to do it. And I don't know of anyone that works any harder than we've ever coached in Josiah. And with that said, we've got high expectations for him. He has high expectations, and his versatility is the key. He's really developing to where he's become a terrific shooter and a guy that we're encouraging him to shoot the ball as soon as he sees any kind of daylight. We want him to let it go, but he led us in rebounding a year ago, and you mentioned it defensively with his versatility. He'll allow us to do a lot of different things on the defensive end, but it's his work ethic and his character. I mean, he thrives on wanting to be a great teammate, and our players look up to him because of how he's willing to go out of his way, almost to a fault on the court, where he sometimes, I think, passes up shots that he needs to take because he's the kind of player that would never, ever want anybody to think that he's looking out for himself. And but as I mentioned earlier, he's a guy that we challenged about being a leader, and he's done a great job with it.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but when you got to Tennessee and you really set the tone for what that program was going to be under you, was when guys like Grant Williams thrived and Admiral Schofield thrived, and they were chip on the shoulder, under recruited, whatever kind of cliche you want to use for them, and ended up being guys that were pros. And you could throw Jordan Boone in there as well. I know that Josiah was a 5-star guy and came in with a certain level of expectation, but it feels like he's kind of that kind of a dude. Like when it comes to their personality and the way that they carry themselves on the court, he's more of a Grant Williams guy than a 5-star McDonald's what you would expect out of a player like that. Am I wrong? Am I reading that the right way?
Well, I don't think Josiah's ego is such that being a quote unquote McDonald's All-American is something that he certainly earned and deserved through high school. But I don't ever think he thought because of that he had arrived. And so do I think he works like he's got a chip on his shoulder? Absolutely. Because, there were teams that recruited him through the process that talked about one and done players. And, he was a player that said, hey, I know I'm not a one and done player, not to where I want to get and where I want to stay. I think that goes back to his maturity. And, but does he have he works like a guy that's got a real chip on his shoulder. And the fact that he feels like he still has a lot to prove and wants to prove, but above and beyond all that, what he wants to do individually, I will tell you that he wants to win in the worst kind of way.
All right. So I think shooting is going to be a big key for you guys this year, right? Because of how good Fulkerson can be and because of the ability that Kennedy has to be able to pass the ball, right? If you have shooters that can space the floor, all of a sudden it creates so much space for him to be able to create, to be able to find people, to be able to find the passing lanes that make things happen. So for me, whatever, the X factor or whatever cliche you want to use for that, I feel like it's going to be Justin Powell and Victor Bailey. If those guys, and Santiago to a point, if those guys are making shots, are forcing defenses to pay attention to them, are creating that space in the paint, I just feel like that opens up everything for everybody else. Is that, am I onto something there? Am I smart? Tell me I'm smart.
Yeah, no, I think you are smart with that comment. I'm not saying with all of them, but that one's a smart comment, but that's true. And you know what? And I tell you, you got to throw in Zakai Zigler. You got to, because he's a guy that we picked up late. And you're right. We've got to space the floor. I do think that we've got a chance to be as good a shooting team as we've had since we've been here. And but all those guys, and again, Josiah, I mean, he's a player. Olivier Como is a guy that has improved his shot. And what we're encouraging those guys to do when they're open with shots that they practice in the rhythm that they practice with, we want them to shoot the ball. And it's plain and simple. And because we want space for Kennedy to do what he does, and Santiago and Fulke, we want those guys to have room to work. And the way we can do that is by letting people know that we're going to shoot it. If you don't guard us, we're going to shoot the basketball.
So you have a 7-man freshman class coming in. We talked about Kennedy a little bit. You just mentioned Zakai, Brandon Huntley, Hatfield, 4 other guys. Like who out of that group are you kind of expecting to step up and play a bigger role, to step up and get some major minutes? It takes freshmen a little while, but that kind of ends up being a game changer for a lot of teams once you get kind of into the heart of conference play.
Well, when you look at our team, and certainly Brandon is a guy that with his body, we're expecting him to give us some quality minutes. There's no question about that. But like all freshmen, he's taken he's going through the process that you go through, understanding there's a difference in high school basketball and college basketball. But when you think about the rest of our, whether you're talking about Quentin or whether you're talking about Jemiah, those 2 guys we think can really give us a great defensive presence, and both of them have a great knack of being able to drive the basketball. and finish and make good plays happen. And if you look at each member of our class, and then we mentioned Zakai, what he's been able to bring. Jonas is a guy that has brought length, but he's been hit with some preseason things that have kept him out. And, but his length is another thing that we haven't had in a long time. But the fact is, every one of those guys will have a chance to impact us in some way, somehow. It will depend on how quickly they understand the role they have to play. And it always goes back if they embrace defense the way they need to, and which I think these guys will do that. There's no doubt they know that if they want to get on the floor consistently, they have to be consistent on that end. And then on the other side, just simply understanding the value of the basketball.
So this is what I'll leave it with. I think that the SEC is going to be the best conference in college basketball this season. If you just kind of look at how many teams are expected to make the NCAA tournament, how many teams have really, really good coaches that may not end up kind of being in that conversation. You look at the preseason projections, Frank Martin isn't projected in the top half. Buzz Williams isn't projected in the top half. Kermit Davis, Jerry Stackhouse. Tom Crean was predicted 14th. He won the Big Ten 5 years ago. So it feels like that kind of changed right around the time when you got to the SEC. It was like Bruce got to Auburn, you got to Tennessee, all kind of in that same. Will got to LSU, all kind of in that same couple year stretch. So have you seen the league grow and get tougher? And what has that investment into basketball kind of produced, through your eyes?
Well, I do think we have the best league. I really do. I think we're the best league, top to bottom, in almost any sport you want to pick. And we do have terrific coaches in the league. And I know there's a lot of teams that you mentioned there that they've let it be known that they think they've had the best. They're going to have the best teams they've had. I do have a great deal of respect for the coaches and the jobs that they'll do with the material that they have. But I'd like to see our national perception change about our league because, you see it. You're in that side of it where every year everybody thinks that leagues have been great year in and year out are going to do it again. And that's not necessarily true. But when you look at the commitment, I think that Greg Sankey made when he came in and hired Dan Leibovich, I think what we've done now with our officiating with Mike Eads and this league, they're serious about basketball. And if you go back and look, my first SEC meeting, the commissioner stated how every team in the league, every sporting league was doing well other than basketball at the time. But since that conversation, this league's done pretty well. And now we've just got to continue to build on it, get teams, as many teams as we can. I think on a bad year, we should be getting 6-7 teams in the NCAA tournament. But and then we need to do well in postseason play. So
I don't know if we can quite say it yet, but the SEC is almost a basketball conference. Not quite there yet. Still, football's still pretty good, but it's almost a basketball first conference.
I think it's an athletic conference. I think that when you think about baseball, I think you think about track and field, you think about gymnastics, you think about volleyball. I mean, you think about the national championship. It's simply the best in the country at whatever any sport you want to pick, and it is time that people do what we need to do with basketball. But it's also up to us to be consistent year in and year out. You can't be, one hit wonder. We've got to stay in it every year and over a long period of time. But there is no doubt that I do believe that the SEC is the best athletic conference in the country, and it is only going to get better.
Well, listen, Rick, I do appreciate the time. I'm going to let you get back to watching. Looks like you got some F1 races going on back there behind you, and I'll just be waiting on my invite for a college football Saturday to sit there and watch 6 games on those TVs you got behind you.
Well, you can do that, but one of those stations will have NASCAR. If it's on a Sunday.
How by me?
All right. Take care.
Thanks, man. Before we move on, let me tell you guys a little bit about our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up for Bet Rivers yet, now is the time because they are offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart is that they require just one playthrough to turn your bonus into cash money. With their Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawing your winnings is safer, it's more secure, and it's more reliable. Now that basketball season is tipping off, get in on the action at betrivers.com today or by downloading the Bet Rivers iOS app. You must be 21 years or older. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And while I got you here, let's talk about the Field of 68 Media Network, where college basketball matters most all year round. This is a digital media and podcast network that we've been building over the course of the last year. We have shows hosted by some of your favorite players, covering the program that they love the most. AJ Guyton hosts the House of Hoosier. Eric Devendorf covers Syracuse on the scorer's table. Dan Dickow hosts the Gonzaga Bulldog broadcast. We have Florida's Patrick Young and Duke's Andre Dawkins and North Carolina's Shamon Williams and Michigan's Stu Douglas and Illinois' Deion Thomas. The list goes on and on and on. We have more than 30 shows right now. So hit the links below and check them all out. And while you're at it, make sure that you go check out the Field of 12 Media Network, your home for college football. That was Tennessee head coach Rick Barnes. And now I am joined by two guys that know Tennessee basketball as well as anyone. We have the SEC Networks and Tennessee alum, Dane Bradshaw, as well as my co-host and a Tennessee native, Terrence Oglesby. Gentlemen, how are we doing, guys? What's going on?
I'm great, man. Ready to talk some hoops. I'm excited for the basketball season to be upon us.
I'm happy to finally talk about a basketball school. It seems like Tennessee football finally hired the right guy, but it's going to take them a while. Rick Barnes has done a fantastic job at Tennessee. So there's all kinds of talent roaming around Knoxville. Hopefully they can get their football team going, but basketball is going to be pretty good.
So before
now you're going to have to make sure you post this Zoom before Saturday's outcome, because if Ole Miss runs through Tennessee, they're going to be questioning your judgment on it. You know us fans can jump ship pretty quickly on the coach after 1 week to the next. So.
All right. So I before we get into this year's team, I do want to talk a little bit about what happened last season. I was all in on them before the turn of the calendar, right? I thought that they were as good as Gonzaga and as good as Baylor, and I thought that they were going to end up winning a national title, and I felt like my prediction that this was going to be the best sleeper team in the country would look smart. After the turn of the calendar in 2021, it did not look all that smart. They went 11-9 after the new year, and they just couldn't score. There were games where they would score 45, 46, 47 points, and it just felt like they never really kind of got out of second gear. Dane, what do you think was the cause of that last season? Was that just the result of kind of the fact that no one was able to be together and they had so many new pieces and so many young freshmen on that roster?
Yeah, a few things. I think everybody recalls the inconsistency, but you weren't wrong with that expectation. And I don't think the fans' expectations were too high, because you had seen this roster play to a certain level, and then the next night they won it. So you continued to have hope for them, like, all right, hey, if Fulkerson can be playing at his best, and if point guard play can be good, and if Victor Bailey on the wings making shots, and then you got the freshmen. But to me, there was a number of things. Obviously, Fulkerson, wasn't at his best all season long, ended up getting hurt and battling through those injuries. And they like to play through the post, and this was going to be kind of his, I shouldn't say breakout year, because the end of the previous season is when he really broke out as a star, but just wasn't at his best. And going into the season, I was wrong when I went and watched them practice, because I go, man, I'm intrigued by them because they got so many guys that can play the point. I mean, it'll speed up their fast break. They get the rebound, and you don't have to look for your point guard. Forget that 1 or 2 seconds to find an outlet pass. You got 4 guys that can get it, bring up the court, make a good decision. But what happened was, in my view, it was a little bit of quantity over quality at the point guard spot. You had a lot of guys that could play point guard, but you didn't really have anybody that could excel at that spot. And then eventually they tried to put the freshman Jaden Springer in at point guard. He's more of a, not only is it the most demanding spot on Rick Barnes's team, but you've got a freshman who's much more comfortable as a combo scoring guard. And then they put Keon Johnson there some. And so there was a lot of things. And then, the other part that you look back on and say, all right, maybe expectations were a little bit high, is they had all these sophomores coming back with Vescovi, Josiah, Jordan James, all those guys that had, been thrown into the fire the previous season. So you said, hey, that experience is going to make them so much better. And we kind of looked at them as just upperclassmen vets, when the truth was they weren't upperclassmen. They had one freshman season, and then they had a COVID off season, which, screwed up everybody. And I'm not sure that they were ready to take that next step and be a good enough supporting cast for the freshmen. And ultimately, I thought Tennessee ended up having to rely way too heavily on Keon Johnson and Jaden Springer down the stretch, as opposed to them being the icing on the cake for the roster. That they were the cake. And I don't know that that proved out to be the most efficient thing for them. It's just hard to rely on those guys. But the good news is a ton of, yes, they've lost a couple of those stars, but they've got their core coming back from Fulkerson to Josiah James, who I'm probably as most excited about James, despite, Kennedy Chandler and the freshman coming in that I know Terrence will get into as well. But, Josiah Jordan James is a guy that he's just from his freshman year, just good at everything, maybe not great at one thing, but has just gotten better at every single facet to where now I'm expecting to be the most complete version we've seen of him. More importantly, he has embraced the leadership role. I mean, he took accountability for how the season went. Everything you would want a leader and captain to say after the NCAA tournament loss, he said it. And I've got plenty of reason to believe he's been walking the walk this offseason.
So you mentioned the point guard issue. It kind of felt like one of those things. What do they say about quarterbacks? If you have two quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback, right? It kind of felt like that for the point guard situation for Tennessee last year. It's going to be different this year, right, Terrence? They got a kid coming in named Kennedy Chandler, 5-star prospect, potential one and done. There's guys talking about first-round pick, all that kind of stuff with him. What have you seen out of Kennedy, and what do you like about his game?
Well, elite speed. And I think one of the things that Dane touched on when you don't have a point guard, Vescovi's a good point guard when you're in the half court and you're setting things up. I think Kennedy Chandler, he's going to add another element to that break, something that they haven't had in a couple of years, just because that level of speed and those guys running down on the wing, it's just going to change the game and flip it on its head. I think the change of pace is going to help, but Kennedy Chandler, #1 ranked point guard in the country. People have compared him anywhere from Eric Bledsoe to you name a speedster point guard. I think he's going to bring a different element. And Rick Barnes has done a great job with really fast point guards. If you think about it, Ford when he was at Texas, TJ Ford when he was at Texas, Terrell McIntyre at Clemson. Now you've got another undersized point guard with elite speed. I think it's really going to change the dynamic of how this Tennessee team can play. And Fulkerson and Josiah James, those are ball movement guys. Those are hit that extra pass guys. When they're asked to be featured a little bit, I'm not really sure that's what they're supposed to, what they're geared to do. Maybe they're kind of more ball movers. When I saw Josiah James play in high school, I thought he reminded me a lot of Sean Livingston, post-injury Sean Livingston, somebody who liked to get to that elbow and then find guys. And then when he's relied to score a little bit more, it kind of falls apart at the seams. But I like the pieces. I think this year they have they have that change of pace guard. I almost compare them a little bit, Dauster, to Maryland, to where they had a lot of big bodies. They didn't really have a change of pace guard. This year, they have Kennedy Chandler as that change of pace guard in the same form that Maryland has Fats Russell as a change of pace guard.
Yeah.
Well, I love those comparisons, and I'll interject real quick. Sorry, Rob, but and for Tennessee fans, they'll liken the speed to Jordan Bone, who was not necessarily the one and done All-American guy. Now, had he come back for, I guess it would have been his senior season, like everybody hoped he would. I thought he could have been an All-American caliber kid. But in Rick Barnes' offense, it's still non-negotiable. He wants to operate through that elbow and get a paint post touch. Now, a paint post touch in the average viewer listener's mind is feed the big man. That's not necessarily the case. Jordan Bone used to get it down there so quick, get to the elbow, and now all of a sudden you're operating your offense within the arc or at the arc. And I think what happened last year was they didn't have that speed to initiate their offense that close. So then they had to go through Fulkerson at the high post way more. To your point, Terrence, Fulkerson and Josiah James, they don't need to be the go-to player every time down. As great as Grant Williams was, Grant Williams even had the luxury of Jordan Bone give him a break. Like, all right, every possession doesn't really have to go through me to get Barnes the paint touch he wants. And so I couldn't agree more. When you look at guys like Vescovi, James or Fulkerson or others, I know when I played, like, hey, man, I was better in a certain position. You put me in a position where I need to lead the team in scoring and take more shots, I'm going to be getting booed way more often. You put me in a position over here where it's like, hey, just try to shut that dude down and dive on the floor. Like, all right, I got my role now. And so I think guys are going to be much more comfortable in their roles for all the things you said.
Yeah, I was going to make that same point about Jordan Bone. The other point guard, Terrence, not to cut you off, is DJ Augustine when he was at Texas. Like, Rick Barnes does really, really well when he has those quick little lightning quick guards. Go ahead, Terrence. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
If you look at Barnes' secondary break when he has that fast guard. And then you see when Fulkerson had that great game against Kentucky a couple of years ago, what's happening is Bone was getting into the paint early in the offense. And then when he was flipping it back to Fulkerson was then attacking closeouts. And that's something he excels at. That's something he's really good at. He can't do it by himself, but he's more of an advantageous scorer and an advantageous playmaker. If he has that initial thing already done for him, Fulkerson can be really good for you.
So Kennedy Chandler is not the only newcomer that Tennessee has coming in this season. The other big name newcomer, I guess, is probably Justin Powell coming in, the transfer coming in from Auburn. And to me, he kind of provides something else that I think they were missing last season. That's shooting, right? You got a kid coming in. He made 40-something% of his threes when he was at Auburn last year. You have Vescovi, who I think is a better shooter when he's off the ball. You have Victor Bailey on the roster this year. So last season, I think one of the biggest issues that you ran into was that even when you were able to get Fulkerson the ball in the paint, they were just, you could collapse on them. You don't have to worry about Keon Johnson taking jump shots. If Keon Johnson is going to beat you making threes, you're going to lose that game, right? That's the shot that you want them to take. And I don't think that you can say that about this group this season. So now not only do you have the speed, Dane, at the point in Kennedy Chandler, but if you help off of Justin Powell, if you help off of Victor Bailey, if you help off of Santiago Vescovi, like you have guys that can knock down those threes and make those shots if you leave them open.
Yeah, that's a terrific point and a huge one. I mean, Alabama Nate Oates, they're 5 out, spread you out, dribble, pick and pop guys, and that works for them. Rick Barnes is not going away from feeding it down into the post, whether it's the elbow like I talked about or the post. I mean, they're not going to go away from what he's comfortable with. They'll make adjustments, but that's going to be a critical part of their offense. And to your point, you can't maximize that if you had non-shooters all around and they're just crowding, digging, helping, all those other things. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, when you go and you list all those shooters that you just mentioned, and Josiah James can knock down shots too, I mean, there's threats everywhere. People are going to really have to pick and choose who they're going to help off of and how they're going to cover Tennessee. And yeah, Justin Powell, I remember you didn't get to watch a lot of him last year. He got a concussion pretty early on, I believe, before conference play began. But boy, one game I did watch the whole thing of was against a very talented Memphis Tiger roster. He was the best player on the court against Memphis, and in dominant fashion. He had to step in and play point guard, even though he's a 2. I don't know, he had like 25 and 5, whatever it was, but he was all over the place. So another welcomed addition for sure for Tennessee, Rick Barnes and this team. And I'll go a little bit off Tennessee, but it's kind of like Xavier Wheeler at Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Who transferred away from Georgia. The guy set an assist record. He got 7+ assists a game on a Georgia team that had no scorers, no shooters. Like, that's amazing to me. So when you think about what he's going to be able to do, when you have more gaps and more spacing, it's no different than a fresh opportunity for somebody like Fulkerson or anybody else in that offense for driving lanes, more gaps and more advantageous paint touches.
Yeah, and one other thing that I'll add real quick, Terrence, and then I'll kind of let you jump in here, is that Justin Powell can play a little bit on the ball. He did play the point for Bruce Pearl last year. We've seen Santiago Vescovi play on the ball. We've seen Josiah Jordan James be the guy that initiates offense. So you still kind of have that benefit, right, where you have multiple guys that can be that playmaker, that first initiator, but you also have that point guard that you give the rock to, and he's going to be the guy that's going to be kind of setting everything up, right? So I do think there's some value in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's value in it. But going back to Justin Powell, I mean, he was a triple-double threat every night. I mean, 11.7, 6.1 boards, almost 5 assists. Like, he sees the floor and he plays at a high level. Plus, he's big. I think that's a big part. I think another key factor, we talk about shooting a lot, Josiah James has to be better. I mean, 30% from 3, if he's able to extend his range out, and his shot's not broken, Dane. That's the thing that's curious about it. It's like he can't seem to figure it out and shoot on a consistent level. But you saw the emphasis on the paint. We go back to last year a little bit with Keon Johnson, because they didn't have that speedy guard that could get in there or another way to get in there. They force-fed Keon Johnson the ball at about 15 feet and were hoping he could get in there. They were just hoping that he could get in there and draw some double teams. Victor Bailey shot 34% last year. They thought he was going to be better coming from Oregon. When he was at Oregon, he shot 40%. If this team shoots the ball better, and I think they will, because Kennedy Chandler is going to create more closeout situations and a little bit more open shots. They don't have to be a lot more open, but they have to be a little bit more open, and that success rate is going to jump up. I would assume anywhere from 3 or 4 points percentage points from three. I think that's the big thing. But, like I said, I feel like we're dogging on Fulkerson. I don't want to dog on Fulkerson. I think he's probably the best bailout 5-man in college basketball, because what happens is some of these guys try to get downhill a little bit too quickly. Josh Bone used to do that. He used to get a little bit too far.
Yeah.
And the great thing that he had on that roster was John Fulkerson waiting at the top of the key, ready to reverse that ball. And he's so smart and he's such a good passer and he attacks closeouts. If he has that extra element, that extra piece to give him a little bit more space, he can be really good.
Yeah, I mean, he's
yeah,
very
Barnes
good
used to refer to him as the they used to refer to him as the fix-it guy. I mean, that was their fix-it guy. And so, no, I mean, and you're right. So when your fix-it guy's a little broken, you got a problem. But I think he's back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say he's very good at what he does when you're asking him to do a job, right? When you're asking him to kind of play that specific role. If he's going to be the centerpiece of the offense, I think that's a little bit too much for him to do. Let me ask you guys this question. So it's a little bit bigger picture, but for me, Rick Barnes' best teams at Tennessee have been the ones where he kind of had those like under recruited guys and those undervalued guys, and the Grant Williams, who was a 3-star, and Admiral Schofield, who no one thought was going to be really all that good, and Jordan Bone, who no one expected to be capable of being drafted into the NBA. He's gone away from that. Like they're bringing in the 5-stars now. So I just wonder, it feels like he's trying to make quick fixes to problems that he had on some teams, right? Like, so in 2020, they had some issues with their defense. So they bring in Keon Johnson and Jaden Springer, try to get better defensively with 5-stars. It doesn't necessarily work as well as they thought it was going to. You have issues at the point, so you bring Kennedy Chandler, who's like a kind of a one and done fix. So I just wonder, is there a risk in doing that, or is this just what kind of college basketball is at this point, T.O.?
I think it's just what college basketball is. But if you look at what he's done, sure, he gets Huntley Hatfield. Sure, he gets Kennedy Chandler. But he also added Jonas Adu, who some people say is a one and done. He's not. He's not going to be able to play enough. He's going to be at least 2. He's going to 2 and through or whatever everybody else says. And then they had a sneaky signing in August. Dane, you know who it is. Zakai Zigler from New Jersey. This 5'9" sucker can go. He can shoot it. He put on a show at Peach Jam this year, and he reclassed early. Huntley Hatfield, he's awfully young, 6'10", 250. He's out of Nashville. He's awfully young. I'm not sure exactly if he's going to be eligible for the draft, but I think at least 2 out of those 4 that I just mentioned, they're going to take a second. Not to mention Quentin Debundi. Debundi, help me out, Dane. You speak French? You speak French?
I haven't gotten. No, I'll go on here real quick and see if I can't get the pronunciation guide, but I'm gonna let you go with that one.
Nah, Quentin Debundi. I mean, they got those 2 definite one and dones. I think Huntley Hatfield qualifies, but they also got 3 guys that are super talented that you're going to be able to hang on to for a little bit. And I think that's what they saw with Josiah James. Even though he was a top 25 kid, he was somebody who was going to have to stay a little bit longer in order to be successful.
And there's going to be turnover every year in college basketball. But I think the cream's rising to the top too. You look at a team like Tennessee where the transfer portal was to their advantage. They didn't lose anybody big, but they gained somebody like Powell. And then when you get yourself to a point where you can recruit guys like a Kennedy Chandler or the Keon Johnson, Jaden Springers, how do you pass on that? You don't. Now, the balance for Rick Barnes is, and he came in from the very beginning and said, I'm going to start with the 3 and 4-star guys. We're going to get it to a certain level, and then we'll be able to get our 5-stars. But it's not like they're just taking any 5-star that's available. It's got to be the right fit culturally. And, can they be coached hard enough the way Rick Barnes is going to do it and all those things. So, but to me, there's probably not going to be a lot of comparisons to Kentucky. But when you look at Kentucky, Coach Calipari always says, my best teams are when we have great elite guard play. We've got some terrific freshmen, but we have a mix of upperclassmen and veterans. Mm-hmm. Can't you say the same about Tennessee right now? I mean,
yeah, for sure.
That checks just about every box. Whereas last year was a little bit. I mean, they had a better year than Kentucky, but it was a little bit like that. Like, hey, they were relatively young outside of Fulkerson, but you had experienced sophomores and some of these freshmen. Well, you know what? Now, yes, you lost some of those freshmen. You're replacing them with more 5-stars, but at least your sophomores are still there that are now upperclassmen, and so you improved in those areas. And so, I mean, I'm just really excited for this team. And look, I think they're going to do fine. The pressure is going to be in terms of the success that you can have in March and play yourself to a good enough seed. And and see if you can't. It's just wild to me that when you look at Tennessee compared to the rest of the SEC, and I don't know how many schools haven't gone to a Final Four, but Tennessee is, traditionally, what coaches would usually call a top 3 job. Coaches love the Kentucky job, the Arkansas, and Tennessee. Now, I know everybody could debate all those, but when you look at it like that, and it's like, man, the Final Four is still missing from Tennessee's history, and you never know if this could be that year where they break through.
So let me ask you guys that, and we can get out of here. What would a successful season be for Tennessee basketball this year? T.O., why don't you take that first?
I would say a Sweet 16, and then John Fulkerson gets a Powell sponsorship for life. I mean, I think a Sweet 16 is a success. I think there's a possibility to do more, but when you're fix-it guys or your older guys, and then you have that elite talent, the dynamic of college basketball is changing so much. You reference Kentucky, I think Cal even made the jump this year to the transfer portal, where he was going to get the best transfers available and then pepper in some guys. And it goes back to what you were saying, Dane. I think a successful season this year for Tennessee is a top 4 seed in the SEC tournament. And then you're looking at a top, because the SEC is so good this year, I think you're looking at a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. And I think they're a second weekend team. I don't think there's any reason they shouldn't be. Could they make a Final Four? They could, but college basketball is loaded with a lot of old guys this year. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I agree. When you think about how far the SEC has come, and I heard Bruce Pearl on a podcast recently, and Bruce has been around this league since 2005, either coach at Tennessee, broadcasting, coach at Auburn. So he's got the benefit of a greater perspective in that timeline than any coach in the league. And he says that there's no question, top to bottom, this is the strongest and most well-coached SEC he's ever seen. And it just keeps getting better. So with that point, it's real easy for us to say, Sweet 16 and see where they go from there, which I think is a fair expectation. But I'm looking at the SEC schools now. Alabama, they're going to have that expectation at least, right? Mm-hmm. Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi State this year. Yep. LSU is going to have that expectation. Outside of that, okay, maybe the expectations are less, or NCAA tournament. But that's 8 teams in the SEC that feel like a Sweet 16 would be a suitable year. That would be an acceptable year. It's starting to become a kind of that football mindset, and where so many schools across the conference got the same expectation with their fan base, and it's been fun to watch. And it's I was telling somebody the other day, when you watch Monday Night Football and you always see the players say, I'm so-and-so from the University of Tennessee, so-and-so from the University of Florida. It's starting to look like that now when you turn on an NBA game and you see a kid from LSU. Here's a kid from Florida. Here's a kid from Kentucky, Tennessee, A&M. Like it's nuts the amount of pros that the SEC is starting to produce right now, and I don't see them losing momentum. But with that said, I'll caution fans that your expectations are high, but as Terrence said, you're not the only good team in the league either. Like there's some good ones out there.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to note that you can finish probably 11-9 in the SEC this season and be a top 5 team. And I also think it's important to note that you just listed all those teams. You didn't mention the team that's coached by Frank Martin. You didn't mention the team that's coached by Buzz Williams. You didn't mention the team that's coached by Tom Crean. You didn't mention the team that's coached by Conzo Martin. You didn't mention the team that's coached by Kermit Davis. So even like the bad teams in this league are coached by guys that have pretty good pedigree. And then there's Vanderbilt and, whatever.
Easy on my man Stack. Hey, look, Frank Martin, they've got a team down there that could make the tournament. With all the transfers, they've got the SEC, man. I'm telling you, this year, it rivals Big Ten last season, where there were just so many teams that could make the tournament. I think they're in the same conversation. The worst thing that could happen.
But like A&M and Vanderbilt are probably the only 2 fan bases that might not be expecting an NCAA tournament bid. So my point was on the Sweet 16 part. But you're right. South Carolina, Missouri, Ole Miss, those teams, they're expecting to make the tournament. So you've got 90% of the league that's like, yeah, it's a bad year if we don't. So,
yeah.
And let me tell you something. They're not all going to make the tournament. So somebody's going to have a disappointing year, it doesn't mean they're a bad coach. It's just going to be one of those things.
Yep, that's the SEC this season, which should make it fun. It's part of the reason why I'm looking forward to the 2021-22 college basketball season more than any I can remember. So for Terrence Oglesby, for Dane Bradshaw, I'm Rob Dauster. That was the Tennessee preview for this season. Thanks, guys.